ja.
Hey guys, welcome back to Heiko's Garage. I haven't posted a real video in a pretty long time. Kind of feel guilty about it, but busy at home, busy at work. Big old construction project going on outside my garage. We're adding a carport with a deck on top, and that's just, yeah, my garage is a utter disaster. We're storing building material in here, and I barely have any space to move. But I do want to do something to my motorcycle, and I got to record that for you guys because I came across that on another YouTube channel. I will leave the link to that YouTube channel in the video description. It's a German channel, so it's in German, and that's probably my main reason why I'm making the same video or kind of the same explanation as the guy did in that video in English. It's Uncle M. So yeah, Uncle M is the YouTube channel, and he explains how to quiet down the valve train on a vintage Airhead. Here in this case, it's going to be my R90/6, but if you have a /5 or all the way up to /7, you have a pretty clattery, noisy valve train. And there are a few different methods that people use to try to quiet that down a little bit, but yeah, it doesn't usually last very long because the valve train just works itself loose again. I'll explain it when we look at it. But the guy came up with a pretty good idea, and I think that's a pretty good solution. Some people might not like it because BMW didn't come up with it, and you know, the BMW engineers, they are just always right, and nobody else can do anything right. That's kind of, you know, the gist that I'm getting from a lot of those forums and stuff. If you are not a BMW trained mechanic from the 1970s that went to BMW school when those bikes were brand new, you don't know anything about Airheads. But I'm going to show it anyways, and I'm going to take the brunt of all the hate just for you guys, because I know there are some people out there just like me. I am a trained mechanic. I am an industrial mechanic. I worked on big production machinery. I can fix a lathe and a mill and all kinds of other gearboxes and whatnot. I can weld. I've worked with hydraulics and pneumatics. And so I've a little bit of experience, but I'm just not a sanctified BMW motorcycle mechanic, and therefore I don't know much. But I will show you what I'm going to use here on my bike, and this is my bike, so I can do whatever I want to it. And I will show you a method that I learned from another Airhead enthusiast from Germany, from a German YouTube channel, and show this here. Give full credit to Uncle M. I think that's what his channel name is. If not, I will put the correction up here, and I will also put a link down below. All right, let's turn the camera around, take a look at what we're talking about here today. So here is the valve cover on my R90/6. Under here is the valve train with some rockers and push rods and all that stuff. And those bikes, this one here is a 1974 R90, are a little noisy. The noise is not bad. It's not breaking. It's not broken. It's just how those valve trains are built. And the design of it causes all the clattering and the noise and all that. Here's a 14 millimeter nut in the middle that we need to take off. I already have a oil pen sitting down here to catch some residual oil. So we're going to take that off. I have a spring washer in here that will eventually come out. And then you have two nuts, one here, that you have to take off. And then you can take your valve cover off. I hope the audio is okay. I'm just using my phone here, but my audio meter on the screen says it looks all right. As long as I don't get too excited about it and start yelling at the camera, I think we're going to be all right. All right, so here is also a flat washer and a spring washer. They always kind of have a hard time coming off, but we're going to find everything. So now I'm going to take the valve cover off, and there's some oil in it. I just recently rode my bike. It was a lot of fun. And you know, when I'm riding with earplugs on, it's usually not a big deal. You don't hear the clattering all that much. But then if you take your earplugs out, yeah. So anyways, I got some rags here somewhere. So yeah, we have two rockers and two push rods here, right? So this is the intake rocker. That giveaway is the carburetor. The exhaust rocker, that giveaway is the exhaust connected, right? So in later models of the two-valve airheads, they eventually incorporated some plastic or polymer bushings up here, and they used a shim system to take up some play that the rockers develop between those mounting blocks here. These mounting blocks, they just, this is a stud here in the cylinder head. This is actually a cylinder head stud. The stud goes through the rocker shaft, which is this piece here. And then those blocks pretty much just clamp it all together. And because the rockers have some combination of radial and axial movement, so because the push rod is not perfectly opposite the valve, if we would have the push rod coming out right here and the valve is over there and it would just be a radial force, the rocker wouldn't move up and down. But due to this strange angle here, we always have a little bit of this rocking force also pushing against those blocks. And that widens that out eventually. So when you first put the rocker shaft, the blocks and the rocker on, then most people try to take up most of the play that you have here in your rocker. And just leave a tiny little bit. You want to see the rocker move up and down a little bit, and you want to see some oil squeezing out. But that play will, over time, over a few thousand miles, will slowly open up a little bit, and then your rockers, they will bounce up and down and become clattery. And what this Uncle M on YouTube proposed was after you have ridden your bike a little bit and everything has loosened up and it's nicely clattering around, that you take a feeler gauge, measure the distance between the block up here and your rocker, measure that with a feeler gauge, figure out what the distance is, and then buy yourself a set of shims. Oops, already dropping them on the ground here. This is a good example. That's what those shims look like. The inside diameter is the same size as the outside diameter of the rocker shaft. And so you measure, and then you find a combination of shims that makes up the same thickness as the gap between your rocker and your mounting block. And then take the rocker and the block off, take those nuts loose, take it off, put the shims in there and assemble it. And then you don't need to do the squeezing together with, some people use woodworking clamps with a couple sockets to squeeze it together to take up the play here in between the blocks and the rocker. And I do that too, or I used to do that too. And then eventually it will just go back to its natural habitat, its natural position, and just loosen up and then become clattery again. He says if you just leave it in its natural position after riding it for a few thousand miles and you measure this gap and then just fill it up with some BMW made, by the way, these are from a later model Airhead. These are hardened steel shims that are available in 0.1 millimeter, 0.2 millimeter. I don't even remember what I ordered here. Here's my receipt. Let's look real quick. I bought this from MaxBMW, which is a authorized BMW parts house. Shim. I can't tell you by part number here. Let's see. Maybe it says that on the package. So I bought all kinds of different thicknesses so that I can. Yeah, it's just a part number actually made in Germany. They come in those little packagings here. I have a micrometer, which I can measure those shims with. So if I can't figure it out by part number, I can at least measure them and then match up my measurement. Here's another part number. So they're very thin. Let me grab one here. Here's a very thin little steel shim. Now, some people would say, oh yeah, but then you have metal rubbing against metal. Actually, the rocker is a cast steel piece, and these here are machined steel blocks. There is already metal to metal contact, and the only thing that keeps metal from metal to metal contact to a minimum and lubricates it and keeps it from galling and wearing is oil being pushed down through this cylinder head bolt opening That's actually the delivery method, how oil gets into the rocker here and lubricates the bearing. This is going through the opening of the stud and gets pushed into the rocker, and some oil squeezes out at the top and at the bottom here. This is how this all is lubricated. So if you just add a shim in there that fits the gap perfectly, and you are not clamping this together like a 190-pound gorilla, and you leave it in its natural position, you are actually not changing anything. You still have steel on steel contact, but it's still lubricated and has enough play in there to allow a cushion of oil in between the block and the moving rocker, right? All right, so what you gotta do is to put the cylinder that you're working on into top dead center. Top dead center compression. And how you know that you are in top dead center compression is if both of those rockers here have play. So there is no tension on the valve spring. Currently, there is tension here on this exhaust spring or exhaust valve, but not on the intake on the intake valve here. So you gotta have both valves loose. That's how you know that you're in top dead center compression. And that's what we need to accomplish. I usually do that by just lifting my rear wheel off the ground, put it in 4th or 5th gear, and then I slowly spin my rear wheel forward. That moves the crankshaft, that moves the pistons, that moves the valves. And you can also take your spark plug out, look into the spark plug hole, and when you see the piston come outward, you should see also here in your timing hole the top dead center mark appear. And if it's at top dead center mark here in the timing hole, then you either have the right or the left cylinder at top dead center compression. And then you just wiggle your rockers, and then you know, okay, both rockers are wiggling, and then that means that you are at top dead center, and then you're ready to work on one side. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to put my bike top dead center on this cylinder, and then we're going to start working on this whole mess here. So guys, you see I removed the spark plug. I have, it's really tight here to work around you guys. I have a jack stand under the bike here to lift up the rear wheel. And I have it in 4th or 5th gear. And a little flashlight in my hand. So now you can bump your rear wheel until you see the top dead center. Here's F, the next mark is S. And I have them painted on my flywheel so you can see them a little easier. And here's OT. Oberer Totpunkt is top dead center in German. Now through my spark plug opening, I can see my piston. And if I now touch the rockers, I can feel that they're both under tension. That means that we're not at top dead center at this cylinder. There's F. There's the S mark, and here's OT. And I can see the piston again. All right, now I'm gonna climb around you guys without bumping you. And now we should be able to feel there's play and there's play. And yeah, not much vertical. This one doesn't have much vertical play at all. All right, let's find a feeler gauge. So this is a metric bike, and the shims that I bought from BMW, they are all in metric sizes, so it would make sense to use a metric feeler gauge, right? So let's see, what's the thinnest here? 0.05 millimeters, so 0.05 of a millimeter. That's paper thin here, right? Wipe it off, I always wipe off, so I'm not introducing any kind of grime. And stick it in here. Yeah, there is not much gap at all. So I can feel a little bit of play, but not much. So this cylinder here doesn't seem to be all that loose this direction. Yeah, this is tight as a drum. And this one here is even tighter than a drum. Yeah, what can I say? Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that it seems like on one side of my motorcycle, I always keep this relatively tight and the play doesn't really develop all that quickly. But on the other side, it does pretty quickly. So just to show you guys what will eventually develop here. It hasn't developed on this bike yet because I guess I haven't really ridden it all that much since my last valve adjustment. So we have 6 bolts that hold the cylinder head on. One is down here, one is right above the spark plug, and then those 4. We don't want to touch the top and bottom to keep the cylinder head gasket clamped together, and we're only going to take the ones loose that hold the rocker shaft in place. And these are the ones that we have to then later torque to spec. So now they are loose. You can see how much play is in those mounting blocks that slide over this cylinder head stud here. Same at the bottom. So if we push this all the way apart, so this one will automatically fall down, right? And then lift up this one here. You can see how much play we have in those rockers here vertically, right? And you can also, with all this play, make sure that your push rod here ends up in the middle of the push rod tube. You want to make sure that that's the case, or else they might touch the cylinder head and then make even more noise. So you move stuff around so that your push rod is in the middle of the push rod tube. And that's what you are trying to accomplish. So to actually end up using the shims here in this case, so the bottom I will just swing around so my push rod tube is where I want it. And then I will lift up the top, and then we can just for funsies measure how much gap we currently have between the block and the rocker in this relaxed state. Sorry, English, English, my second language. It's really frustrating sometimes you make videos, and just because I am not perfectly 100% native speaker of English, and I maybe use the wrong word here or there, that people immediately, oh, I thought this video was in English. I don't know what I'm speaking. Is this English to you guys? I think so. I mean, I've been living in the States for 15 years, and my coworkers don't seem to have any issues. But on YouTube, you have so many keyboard warriors that constantly have to bash and complain and, make fun of people. Now this, we're getting there. So 1.4 millimeters. It still goes in. So in a worst case scenario, those mounting blocks can drift apart so much that you end up with, 1.5 millimeters of play. Here's 1.5 now. 1 millimeter and a 0.5. Wipe off. Yeah, this is about, now I can feel some friction. So 1.5 millimeters. This is pretty much the play you could have in the worst case scenario when all those mounting blocks have slid apart. Again, like I said, you got to make sure you arrange this so that the one end of the rocker hits the valve nicely in the middle, and the rocker shaft, or correction, the push rod is in the middle of the push rod tube, right? So that's kind of the most important, that your rocker rolls nicely on the tip of the valve right there, and the push rod is in the middle of the push rod tube, so you don't get some weird noises from stuff touching down there. So we could now go ahead and find a combination of shims that would take up this entire play. I mean, loosely, right? We still want some oil to be able to squeeze out top and bottom. This is not what Uncle M dot is the channel name, what he was describing. In his bike, it was just loose right out of the gate. And so then you hear this. So as the rocker is moving this way, it's also moving up and down, and this is what you hear. And he wasn't recommending doing that, but you know what? Let's just play around a little bit here. So I just said find my feeler gauge. What I meant was my micrometer. This is a metric micrometer, measures to 1/100th of a millimeter. So this is perfectly sufficient for our purposes here. So now we can use this here. We've first, yeah, it sits exactly at 0. So let's take the first bag that we have here with a part number on it, 721 ending, and write down how thick those are. Measure and then write down, of course. There are 4 of those. So first bag, open this up, stick it in there, oops, and drop it on the ground first. And then tighten it up. There is like a little ratcheting mechanism here at the back. So this is exactly a little less than 0.4 millimeters. So this is 0.38. 0.38, that's good. We have 4 of those. And I would say that's probably the thickest one we have. And I brought a Sharpie, 0.38.
5 minutes later.
All right, guys, so I have thought about the problem here a little bit so that after my last valve adjustment, when I tightened down those mounting blocks to take up some of the vertical play of the rocker, I noticed that after even a couple of thousand of miles riding, I haven't really developed any axial play. So axial is this direction and radial is in rotation, right? So I haven't really developed any play. Might be different on the other cylinder because the right side cylinder always seems to be a little noisier than on this side here. But another positive effect of having a shim in here is that now the metal contact is not between the rocker and this mounting block. You can see that my mounting blocks all have like a mark up here. It's just because I have turned those blocks around or maybe used them in a different location. So now you can see this silver shiny ring. That's the metal-to-metal contact that ultimately will happen in here. And now I'm putting a shim in between here so that the metal and metal contact now is done with a shim, and the shim can be replaced. So I think I'm just going to grab a size here. We have the thickest one is a 0.4 millimeter shim, or 0.38, 0.4 millimeters we call it. And I will put that in at every rocker and just see what happens. The reason why I'm only putting one up here and not down there is if you look at the direction, this rotation happens. So it rotates this way to push the spring in, but then due to the angle, it will push the rocker upwards. So the force of the valve train of the push rod will always be upwards. And also, I've noticed now that it's really loose, in its natural relaxed state, the push rod is pretty much in the middle. So I want to only put a shim up here in between here to take up some of that slop that is there right now, but not add a shim down below here, or else it would lift up the push rod out of its perfect centered location. That's the reason. So we're only going to put a 0.4 millimeter shim up there. Then I will only loosely push this together by hand. No woodworking clamps, nothing. Just slightly, and then tighten them down, and then torque them down to spec. I usually do that in 3 steps: 20 Newton meters, 30 Newton meters, and then 40 Newton meters. Some people recommend even a little lower than that because the cylinder head studs here, they go into the case all the way. They're this long. And they're going into the case, just into cast aluminum. And if you tighten those too tight, you can actually pull them out of the threads in the aluminum here. And we don't want to do that. I'm going to look at my records real quick. I have a few service manuals. I will look up. I wrote down somewhere what I did last time, what torque setting I used for these last time. I don't want to overdo it. Okay, let's do that real quick. All right, so I looked it up one more time. I read some recommendations not to go over 35 Newton meters, which is 26 foot-pounds, I think. And so I'm going to stick to that. So we're going to do 20, 25, and then 35 as the last round, or 20 somewhere in between, and then 35 at the very end. That's a recommendation from Snowbum. Robert Fleischer, I think that's his name. He has a whole webpage full of technical recommendations for those old Airheads, and he speaks from experience. So I respect his opinion. So yeah, in the all the way down position, it feels like my rockers are nicely centered over the valve, and my my push rod are nicely in the center of the hole. And that's what we want to achieve. Okay, so let's find the 0.4 millimeter. Yep, and on the floor again. All right, now we have 4 of those, and we will only need 4 of those. Put them here next to me in a safe spot. Make sure they're clean. You're not going to introduce any contamination. Fresh rag here. So, and to insert that shim, you will have to take, I usually just grab the whole assembly like this, take the nuts off. It's just a nut, there is no washer. It's a special nut that has like a washer baked in on one side. And that's the side that needs to go towards the mounting blocks here. And then you just pull it off like this. And then without dropping things on the ground, we're just taking the top block off, put the shim on. Oh, by the way, since we're looking at it, this shiny spot here on my push rod is when a cylinder head gasket isn't installed correctly. Then in the opening here, the cylinder head gasket rubs on the push rod. This is from previously. I have since replaced the cylinder head gasket and it's not rubbing anymore, but that can happen when you don't pay attention to the orientation of the cylinder head gasket. Yeah, you can see the cup. You can look through and you can see the cup at the bottom of the lifter, the cup that receives the round end of your pushrod tube. The little shoulder here on those mounting blocks goes to the outside, goes towards you. You got to make sure, without dropping everything on the floor here, got to make sure you have this shoulder towards you, and then the cut outwards, and the marking on the rocker shaft also towards you. So now we need to verify one more time that our push rod is in the middle of the opening, and that looks pretty good. So you can wiggle that around a little bit, but I'm just going to leave it in the natural down position. So this mounting block is by gravity just resting against the cylinder head stud here. And then the top one, I'm just pushing down with my thumb, just a little bit of finger pressure, right? And that's that. And then you grab your, what is it, a 14 millimeter socket and your wrench, and you just tighten it hand tight, like a little bit, like snug it up so it doesn't move anymore, like that and like that, out of your wrist, no more torque. And then you can feel, yeah, this doesn't have any play. So I might actually take that loose one more time, and don't push as hard with my fingers as I just did. So just so the parts are resting on top of each other. Very good. So we still have valve lash play in this direction. And there is barely any in the vertical direction. That's good. And we didn't force it down like a 190-pound gorilla. And we now have a 0.4 millimeter shim up here. So now I'm going to do that on that second one, and then we will torque it first 20, 25 or 27 or something like this, and then 35 in a cross pattern. You don't need to mess with those two. They haven't been touched, but you need to do this in a crisscross pattern. Okay, guys. So I'm a little slow here with this whole process. I just want to make sure I'm not selling you something incorrect or telling you incorrect statements. The rocker blocks here, or the mounting blocks, pillow blocks, whatever you want to call them. Let's take it loose one more time, just to explain. There are a few different versions. So the /5 blocks look different from the /6, and then the /7 is different. They made lots of changes over the years on the whole valve drive. Even the rockers are different. So whatever you have in your bike, you have to research that a little bit. This here is only applicable for a /6. These are fairly similar to the /5, but the /5 has two-piece rockers. Here, this little step on this rocker block needs to be on the outside, and the slot pointing outward here as well, pointing outward that way. Okay, so the little step towards you, the slot outward, and here in this case, aftermarket rocker shafts, the little indentation dimple needs to be forward. If you don't have a dimple, you can look at your rocker shaft, find where they have been cross-drilled. So there's going to be a hole somewhere here in the middle of the rocker shaft. That's where the oil comes out, and the oil passage has to be pointing forward towards you, okay? So again, when you assemble this and you put this together, BMW actually back in the days, they had a diagram of a tool that you can slide over those 4 blocks, and that squares it all up. So it's like a kind of a rectangular shaped gauge that you slide over, and that makes sure that those 4 blocks are square to each other. I don't have that tool. I'm just always going by centering the push rod and the valve or the rocker on top of the valve. So as long as that lines up, I'm fine. So I slide it around until I'm comfortable here over the valve. And also my push rod is in the center of the opening. And then I tighten down the bottom nut just ever so slightly. So I push it around until I'm happy. And then tighten the bottom. And now the top is still loose, right? The rocker can go up and down. Then I push the block down so that it touches. Not much tension. Put the nut on. Put the nut on, just push down a little bit, just gentle finger pressure, and then tighten that up as well. And that should lead to barely any axial play of this rocker on this shaft. That's all we wanted to accomplish. And we have a 0.4 millimeter shim in here now, so all the mechanical rubbing between this part and this part is now taken up by the shim in the middle. Yeah, so this is good. The shim also doesn't interfere with anything. It's perfectly fine. We still have a valve lash or a valve play, so I can still get my feeler gauge here in between the valve and the rocker, and we will have to adjust the valves after we're done with this. So now I'm going to take the second rocker off, do the same thing, put the little shim on there. And this can be different. Like I said, those blocks, they are always slightly different. If you have a /7, they're actually almost having a skirt that slides over this support here. So it goes over a little bit and centers it a little bit nicer. And there is another pretty good webpage. I will put a link down below and a little description what that webpage is all about. Because on a /6, you can upgrade to the rockers of a /7. On a /5, you can upgrade to the rockers of a /6, which always has advantages doing so if you can get your hands on a fresh set of rockers that are not completely beaten to pieces. So I could find myself a set of rockers of a /7 and put those on here, and that would have the advantage that the rocker blocks don't have as much wiggle room. They are more centered. But yeah, best is always to buy it as a set, or else pieces don't fit very well. The /7 rockers are actually shorter than these rockers. So you can't mix and match. You have to make sure you buy it as a set. And there is a really good webpage. Like I said, I will leave some links down below. Just read through it. There's Snowbump's webpage. And then there is this other one that has nice pictures and explains what you can upgrade and what you cannot. Would be really too time consuming to explain all this here in this video. And then also I don't have a /5 or I don't have parts of a /7, even though I own a /7, but it's sitting behind me in, complete. All right, so here again, I'm making sure that I'm lining up my rocker with my valve and my push rod somewhere in the center of the opening here. And then I'm just tightening up the, let's tighten it up just ever so slightly. And then we're going to wiggle this around a little bit here until I don't have much play, and then tighten the top nut up as well. So that's good. So we have valve flash and valve flash, but barely any vertical play. You want to have a good quality torque wrench, or if you have a cheap one like I have, I actually had a chance to get this calibrated. Now we want 20 Newton meters to start with. 14, 18, 20. So there's 20. This got calibrated back in the company where I worked as an industrial mechanic. And it doesn't get much use. It's probably time for another calibration. So then 20 Newton meters. Oh my goodness. Feels wrong. Okay, that's 20. And now we can wiggle everything one more time. That is good. There is play, but there is no vertical play, and that's good. So now we're going to go to, let's say, 27. That's a good midway point, 27. Oh, that feels wrong. Come on, click. I always feel like this is way too much. Way too much. Oh, here we go. Okay. Now we can check one more time. We still have valve flash. It still moves freely. It's not hanging up. And we barely have any play in the vertical direction. That's good. And now we're going to go to 30, 35. So that's the last step we need to do. Oh my goodness. I'm so afraid to pull the studs out of the case one of these days. I'm just going not all the way there. Okay, that's tight. That feels tight. Don't use a huge torque wrench. Get a shorter one. Get one that has lower settings. Don't do that with one where 35 is like the lower end. You want a torque wrench. You want to use a torque wrench always where the torque setting that you are using is more in the mid-range. Much safer that way. More accurate also. I mean, nowadays you get like electronic ones that measure what kind of torque you are applying in the beep, and this here is all pretty old-fashioned. Okay, so, and now we need to get a couple open-end wrenches, 12 millimeter. All right, so I have two 12 millimeter open end wrenches, or one box wrench, one open. Again, I'm just making sure that I don't have any dirt on those. And then you just crack this one loose. You want 8 thou and 6 thou, or 0.2, 0.15. 0.15, 0.2. In some manuals, it says 0.1 on the intake side and 0.2 on the exhaust side. In older manuals, it's 0.15 millimeters and 0.2. Gives it a little bit more valve flash on the intake side, which is always safer. So having more gap between your rocker and your valve is better than less. So don't make it too tight. So I rather go with the old values, the 0.15. It might be a little clatterier. Is that a word? No. So I have a 0.2 and a 0.15. Okay. So the reason why they put a smaller valve flash on the intake side is because the intake side is always cooled by the intake air. And so expansion isn't as much of an issue. And here on the hot side, on the exhaust side, they give you a little bit more valve flash, so a little bit more play. Okay, so we have this loose. So let's start with the exhaust side, which is 0.2 millimeters. 0.2 millimeters. And this sometimes takes a few attempts, yeah? So you shove this in here. So this actually feels pretty good. But, you know, you want a little bit of friction, but not too much. Some people say that if you can hang it, it's enough friction that the friction of the rocker and the valve holds the feeler gauge. That's perfect. But now the difficult thing is to tighten this nut down without changing the adjustment. So like, you guys are kind of in the way, just saying. So now you need to check one more time, and that's perfect. You can also push on here a little bit, push against the adjuster a little bit, so you're taking up any kind of slag that might be in the valve train, and then test your friction here one more time, and that's pretty good. I hope I'm not covering everything. Yeah, and now you're going to do the other side. And by the way, there is a torque value for this nut as well. I think this is a little bit overdoing it if you really want to use a torque wrench on your valve adjuster here. This is a little overdoing it. I would say just use 2 open end wrenches and just snug it up by hand. You know, like this is a relatively short wrench. You're not going to be able to apply 100 Newton meters and crack this off. So if you tighten this up by hand, I think you're going to be on the safe side. And if for whatever reason, while you're tightening this nut, you're accidentally making this adjustment, or it goes out of whack, then you just have to redo it. But this still feels pretty good. All right, and now we're going to take the second one loose here. It's a little easier to do from this angle here. Yeah, there you go. And then we know, yeah, 0.2 was this one here. You can always double and triple check. And then we go to 0.15 for the intake side now. So that's that one. Put it in here. Oh, that's a little tight. Kind of like there, see that? And then again, you have to hold the adjuster, tighten up the nut without changing the valve adjustment. Ah, now it just fell down. No big deal. That still feels pretty good. Let me push against here. That feels pretty good. There is a little bit of friction, a little bit, not much. Oh, I think I loosened it a little bit. And of course, I drop it into the oil. Oh no, that's perfect. That's good. Yeah, very good. All right, that's the trick. You have to be able to hold on to the adjuster when you're tightening up the nut without changing the setting. That's the trick. All right, so we just torqued those 4 up. We redid the valve adjustment. We have nice valve lash here, and everything seems to be centered. Very good. The push rods are in the center of the opening. And now there is one last thing that I wanted to talk to you about. This here is the cylinder. This is the cylinder head. This is where all the pressures of the combustion push against the cylinder head. This is cast aluminum, and these cylinder heads are known to warping. After years and years of heat cycling and the explosions in there, the cylinder head will become convex. So it will bulge out. So the center point here, where this stud is sticking out, will be pushed out slightly. And then when you use a regular paper gasket here, oh, by the way, take this with a grain of salt. If you are of different opinion, just do whatever you want to do on your bike. But, just keep it civil in the comment section. So this is a common standard paper gasket. They are pretty thick. They will take up some of unevenness, but the cylinder heads on those airheads, they eventually bulge out in the middle. They will become convex. So then you have this valve cover going over top of it. There's still some oil in here. That's normal. And these valve covers, they are, they're probably pretty straight. I can demonstrate here. Let me grab a straight edge real quick for you. So we still have this oily valve cover here that I will clean up before I install it. We'll also get the oil out of it. But just for demonstration purposes, if you put a straight edge over it and there is no, and you look under the straight edge and see if there's any daylight coming through here or in the middle, then you know this is warped, but this seems to be pretty straight. From what I can see from here, there is not much warpage going on. If you take if you would take the rockers off and you would put a straight edge across the cylinder head from here to here across the center, you will notice that the center is most likely bulged out a little bit so that you will have a little bit of a rocking action going on. And this is the case here. So then some people, they smear on all kinds of RTV on those gaskets and glue them against the cylinder head, or they put RTV on both sides and glue everything together to prevent the valve covers from leaking. Some people glue 2 gaskets together with RTV to give it a little bit more squish factor to have no leakage anymore. And that might all work to a certain extent. Or some people would say, okay, take the cylinder head off. And this is here the standard. This is like the standard statements that all those keyboard warriors always make. Oh yeah, you got to take the cylinder heads off, send them to a machine shop, get it all machined flat again, and then you can reassemble with, of course, only new valves and new parts and new rockers and new shafts. And then before you know it, you have spent $2,000. And oh yeah, and don't forget, you have to get a full-on, the valve seats need to be replaced, and the valves have to be redone, and everything has to be redone. You cannot ever just fix something that's broken. In a lot of people's minds on those vintage bikes, you always have to restore and machine and get everything done only by those 4 selected experts out in the world, and never do anything yourself and never find a workaround or fix something that will work for a very long time. So you can either use the standard paper gasket, but chances are that if you have an older airhead that has seen some heat cycles, that eventually the valve cover gaskets will start leaking. And that's not because you bought a bad gasket or that whatever, you did it wrong. It's most likely that your heads are just a little warped. Alternatively, and these are actually purchased from one of those experts. I'm not going to name any names right now. These are silicone gaskets. They're very flexible. They're very forgiving. They're actually gray in color, so they're not as obvious. There's a company out there that sells red silicone gaskets, and they are a little bit more in your face and obvious. And then a lot of people say, oh yeah, as soon as there's any oil on those, they will slide out and slip out and not stay in place. And I can tell you from my own experience, using the silicone gaskets now on a couple different bikes, I haven't had any problems with it. You clean up your sealing surface on the valve cover and on your cylinder head, slap those on, and then you tighten the nuts just by hand, how you would usually do it. Those motorcycles, they were meant to be fixable on the side of the road. Those motorcycles were built by people that had in mind that the owner of the bike on the side of the road could do a valve adjustment and take those valve covers off. So you don't always have to torque everything with a torque wrench. Cylinder head studs, I would agree that is necessary. The adjusters, I don't think so. The nuts here on the valve covers and the center nut is not necessary. Just don't be a 190-pound gorilla. Just take it easy on it, tighten it up, ride it, and if it leaks, tighten it a little bit more. That's what I would do. So these silicone gaskets, they are maybe a little bit more expensive than the paper gaskets, but first of all, they are reusable many, many, many times. The paper gaskets also can be reused, so don't get me wrong. This one here is in perfectly serviceable condition, but my cylinder heads are already, the valve covers are slightly seeping. And no, I don't need to take the cylinders off and do the pushrod tube seals and the cylinder head gasket and do all this, because I just did that. I just did that a year ago. There is new pushrod tube seals and they're dry. My engine is dry as a bone. The only place where it's leaking is from the valve covers. And that is because my cylinder heads are slightly warped. And no, I'm not going to take them apart completely, rip the entire bike apart and send them to the machine shop, because this bike is currently in use and I'm actually riding it. So I just wanted to show you guys the shims. What I'm thinking about it, how I came up with that idea. That was Uncle M, a German YouTuber who explains it really well. And telling you that those silicone valve cover gaskets here are actually working. At least they work for me. And they haven't been squished out and then haven't fallen out. And you just got to put it on and not tighten it like a crazy person. They will stay in place and the bike will not be leaking anymore. At least the two that I have installed them on are not leaking from the valve covers anymore. And I did that on one bike, which was an R65, a newer model from the 80s, that actually had quite significant warpage in the cylinder heads. The older ones, apparently they were a little stiffer. The newer ones with bigger valves and whatnot, they have a little bit more warpage situation going on. But mine apparently also has a little bit, because with a paper gasket, first time use, I can get it dry. Second time use, it will start leaking a little bit. And now I'm going to use silicone gaskets. All right, let me clean up a little bit here. And then we're going to put some fresh gaskets on there. How about that? And yeah, there is a scratch. It probably needs machining. And there is some discoloration from oil and from the old gasket. It probably needs machining for sure. I'm being facetious, sorry. I just have seen too many of those comments in all kinds of forums. There's just you can't repair. You always have to restore. You have to redo, send in, get it machined, only the experts, and you don't know what you're talking about, and all that stuff. Ultimately, this is still a normal combustion engine made by BMW back in the 70s. And back in the 70s, apparently people were more capable, because they would actually give you an owner's manual that explains how to do a valve adjustment, that explains how to do a lot of things on this bike. But nowadays, if you are a DIYer, self-taught mechanic, at least the internet's opinion is that you don't know anything and you are incapable of maintaining your own vehicle, and you should not touch stuff, and you should only ask this one guy, and then that one guy calls everyone else an idiot. And I'm just so sick and tired of hearing and seeing this. This is a machine that someone made, and some other people that are not trained by that one individual who made it, they are still capable of, figuring things out. There's a YouTube channel I'm a big fan of is Musty One. And that guy is, I mean, he worked as a professional mechanic, I think, in the past, but he works on absolutely everything and he teaches himself by looking at the machine. He never opens a manual. He figures out stuff. He goes by common sense. He goes by feel. He goes by looking at it and figuring it out. And he has restored or repaired, should say, or fixed so many different machines without ever stepping foot into a BMW factory school. And it's just amazing how, you know, all those self-declared experts that were in a BMW Airhead class in 1970 something, that they are the only ones that know anything. It's just incredible, you know. I was in a trade school in 1991, 92, 91, and I had a teacher who was also a mechanic. He was a car mechanic, became then a trade school teacher, and he was into airheads. He would restore airheads, the /5s, and he had even an older, he had an R25 BMW, and he would wrench on this thing all the time, and we became friends, and so we wrenched together. And he never went to factory school, and he's still writing. He's in his 70s now, and he still rides his Airhead, and his Airhead has been hanging on for dear life because he's not a factory trained mechanic, you know? All right, rant complete. Sorry about that. I just have had a little bit enough of this. Oh yeah, you got to make sure. And probably because I'm not a trained mechanic, I didn't know which direction to put this gasket on. So I cleaned that surface up, and this discoloration stuff is just from the old gasket and oil. No big deal. We have the gasket on those studs, shove it all together. I can see the gasket all the way around. And then you got to make sure that you have a flat washer, a spring washer, and the nut, or else your bike is going to explode. I mean, it's standard, you know, having a lock washer or a spring washer on top of a flat washer is kind of technical standard. It's not just like that for BMWs. It's like that on most properly designed, constructed machines. All right, so, and then I'm going to grab my wrench here again, or my socket and my wrench. And I'm just going to tighten up the center by hand, no torque wrench. Just take it easy, let it all sit down a little bit like that. So you always want to tighten stuff from the center and then move outwards. So if you would have 6-8 bolts here, you would always start from the center and work your way outwards. That's also common sense, standard. That's every company does that. This is how you avoid warping or tensioning parts unevenly. So every company does that. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Nissan, all the car brands, everyone's teaching the same. I just realized I still have my nut sitting here. All right, and then again, I'm putting a flat washer, a spring washer, and then a nut on there. And as everyone whoever has done this knows, this is kind of a pain in the butt, especially when I have greasy, oily gloves on. And sometimes it just helps if I take my gloves off. I'm not big into working with gloves, to be honest. I have worked on machinery all my life, always without gloves. But, you know, there's always this, you're exposing yourself to carcinogens, oils. You're exposing yourself to chemicals and such. So I try to work with gloves, but then sometimes it just gets too annoying. And with my bare hands, I can actually get this stuff done. Okay, got it on. You got to make sure you don't cross-start those. You want to get them on there by finger and then just tighten them up with your little 10mm open wrench. And then you go riding a little bit. And when it starts leaking out of your valve cover, you just Start in the middle, give it a little bit more snugging, and then give the two outer ones here also a little bit of snugging. You can do that on the side of the road if you want to. And then those silicone gaskets are going to keep the oil in and the dirt out. That's it. So I'm not going to bore you with doing the same thing. Oh, and I'm installing, believe it or not, I am not using a Bosch spark plug. BP60S is what I'm using. NGK. I like NGKs. I don't use the original spark plug caps either. The original ones are the ones that have the big nut here on it. I think my bike never had those. I'm not going to go and buy some vintage looking spark plug cap if I can get. These are NGK resistor caps with 5K ohm resistor in it. And therefore I'm using a resistor-less spark plug. And I am putting the old spark plug back in there. Unbelievable. But it's true. And then I just snug it up. And that's it. And now I'm going to do the other side while you guys are not looking. I hope this helps someone, including my rants. Sorry for me ranting for that long, but I just have seen way too many of those, oh, you don't know anything, you got to do whatever that guy says. Or only let someone repair that has a certificate from 1974 hanging on the wall. Or else you can't get it right. You cannot, you are incapable. So I'm starting again, but anyways. Gasket is all the way around. I can feel it. It's there. It doesn't slip out. They're flat. They're squished. Perfect. And like I said, if it starts leaking slightly, snug it up a little more. Those silicone gaskets, they're very forgiving. They have a little bit more squish factor than the paper gaskets. And therefore, I like them. They work. They don't look very ugly because they're gray. And now we have a 0.4 millimeter shim on the top of each rocker. We only pushed the rocker mounting blocks together by hand. We torqued the cylinder head bolts down again to only 35 Newton meters, no more. And we have a new gasket in here. Oh yeah, we also adjusted the valves to 0.15 millimeters and 0.2 millimeters, or 6 thousandths, that's 0.006 or 0.008 in inches, okay? 6,000, 8 thousandths. 0.15, 0.2 millimeters. Okay, that's it. That's all I got for you today. Alrighty, guys. Sorry for the ranty video, but that has been weighing heavy on my heart. I hope you guys can forgive me. Anyways, and I hope this idea, at least sharing of that idea, will help someone. Those shims, like I said, sorry for hand holding the camera here. Those shims are available from BMW in different thicknesses. I have 0.4, 0.3, 0.25, and 0.2. You can get them at any of the BMW places. MaxBMW would be one of them. And you will have to not look like, let's say you have a /6. You have to look at the parts fish of a /7, and there you will find them, and then you just buy a bunch of them. They're not cheap though. And then you can do the same thing. And when your bike starts getting noisy again and you are planning on doing the next valve adjustment, just use a feeler gauge to find out what the vertical play is in your valve drive, and then shove a shim in there. Don't make it too tight. Okay? Take care. Bye.